Hello everyone. I've written and spoken a few times about the Dragon Age games, but only briefly and tangentially, which is strange, because I've committed far more ink thus far to the Elder Scrolls or Dark Souls or Halo or Wolfenstein or Bioshock games, and of all of those, only two were the game series I was introduced to before Dragon Age. In fact, before playing Dragon Age 2, the only fantasy RPGs I had ever played were Fable 3 and the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. Humorously, this means there was a time when Dragon Age 2 was in my top 5 favorite role-playing games, although admittedly only through lack of competition. These days, I'd say I favor Inquisition, but have a more positive view of the second game than most people. Perhaps one of these days I'll have the opportunity to write about both of those games in the depth that they deserve. But this essay is not about those games. It is instead about the Dragon Age game that I like the least, and which many players like the most, that being Dragon Age Origins. But it is also not about why I like the game less. As a brief explanation, though, it's just a little too rough around the edges. The other games have their distinct faults, but in the case of Dragon Age Origins, the combat, while allowing for a great deal of freedom and creativity, has a slight but noticeable lack in the impactful punchiness of its combat, washes of blood notwithstanding. This innovation on the formula would come later, but Origins was focused on larger things. The game innovates a massive world of wonder and discovery and allows the player to explore that world in the way that they might have then recalled from earlier titles like Neverwinter Nights. This would set the Dragon Age games up to be an evolution away from the older RPGs that had defined the fantasy role-playing genre, that kind of third-person, usually isometric, usually Dungeons & Dragons-based RPG-style genre. And you can see this in their shot-reverse-shot dialogue and animated in-game battle sequences. To players who had walked away from films like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's books and wished that they could take part in more grand battles like this in the world of a video game RPG, Dragon Age Origins was the perfect game. Perfect is always a misrepresentation. Most people don't think Origins is perfect. Those who do likely understand that this is a perfectly fine opinion to hold, even if others don't like Origins the way they do. Many more probably respect the quality and execution behind a lot of what Origins does well, as much as they respect the quality of the things it doesn't do well, or which it simply does less of. For example, I don't love getting grappled endlessly by an ogre during combat, or as I encountered today, by the way, going off script a little bit here, getting webbed up and then repeatedly grappled in between getting webbed up by a group of spiders. I got absolutely trounced by a group of like 4 random spiders that in a fight that I felt like I was kind of over-leveled for anyway. Just a weird game, Dragon Age Origins. For example, I don't love that, and I also don't love how mismatched some of the difficulty levels of different encounters can feel generally. A small group of enemies can wipe your party, and then a theoretically much harder encounter can be a breeze, only for you to face another encounter immediately afterwards that causes you to question whether your entire party is secretly underleveled. This happens to me a lot in the quests, just usually that I do before the Dalish Brazilian Forest quest, and then I end up having an easy time for a while, then I get absolutely tripped up by some random encounter with some basic enemies, and then I kill the dragon really easily, and then Zathrian kicks my butt for some reason. I do, however, love good writing. Online essays, blog posts, videos, and social media posts are rife with poor writing advice and worse writing criticism. I am not the late Ursula Le Guin, nor am I George R.R. Martin. Those writers have had legendary influence on subsequent generations, even as they reflected back on those prior to them, and have been titans of the fantasy genre in a critical post-Tolkien period. I've written about how understanding the craft of writing can make us better critics of bad writing. See my piece on the ending of Game of Thrones. But thankfully, Dragon Age Origins isn't the kind of video game I will need to draw upon my experience with the craft and its study to diagnose with any kind of deeply problematic misstep. Instead, I'm here to answer a different question. Why haven't we gotten another game like Dragon Age Origins? It's important to be specific. There have been and will continue to be games like Dragon Age Origins across the games industry, from major titles that have come close to scratching that itch, to the indie scene which has the hopeful potential to produce games that we haven't even imagined yet. No, what I'm asking is, why have the other Dragon Age games not done what Origins did? Maybe that will make things clearer. I've certainly seen some people articulate this question before, but it mostly gets chalked up to Origins coming out of a different time, to BioWare maybe making a different type of game these days, to the idea that writing in AAA games is going downhill generally. I think all those answers are dissatisfactory for different reasons, namely that they don't tend to look at what Origins did well, and why later games haven't replicated it. In other words, cheap and easy answers haven't diagnosed the writing problems set before any developers of past or future Dragon Age titles. So, let's begin with what makes Dragon Age Origins unique. Other games, especially those that came after, have the cinematic elements, especially voiced in-engine cutscenes or dramatic, large-scale battles. Other games, especially older games, offer depth in the form of text-driven dialogue options or customizable builds with many abilities. Players may like these things, and they're totally right to, at least in my opinion, but these aren't totally unique elements. For the sake of argument, I'll also be avoiding any allusions to nostalgia as well. Many players probably do feel nostalgic for Origins, but I think I've actually identified something in Origins that makes it different from later Dragon Age games, in a way that is probably not reproducible, at least until the very end of the series, whenever that may be. Finally, to get to the point, the Dragon Age series has a world-building problem, and it started with Dragon Age Origins, the very first game. Because the world-building of Dragon Age, and of Origins in particular, is so compelling and beautiful to the point that I could probably write a massive essay about even just the spiritual, religious, and philosophical elements of these games as I did with the Dark Souls games, that may seem like a strange point. I can already imagine how some people will respond. Dragon Age has great writing. The world building introduced in Origins is fantastic. What are you talking about? Yes, it is. I completely agree. The problem isn't that it's bad. It's beyond good, actually. It's fantastic. The problem is that it's not sustainable. Let's run through a few ideas to ensure that we're all on the same page. First, for a writer, what does it mean to do world building, to build that actual world? Let's say that I want to tell you a story, right? In this story, a group of adventurers come to a strange town. This town is on the outskirts of a dark forest, its ramshackle rot sustaining a few meager livelihoods, mostly the old and determined who would not or could not make the journey anywhere else out from the forest's shadow. Our adventurers know, or suspect from rumor, that deep in the forest lies who knows what, but further in, or so our characters are told, is a dark fortress, a great abandoned castle, a hollowed wreck that none dare approach. In hushed whispers, the adventurers are warned away, but they forge on through thorn and thistle, through mud and muck, until the trees thin to wide places where the wind howls between, as if they too flee in fear of what may come from the ever-blackening sky. There our few heroes stand within sight of that decrepit wreck, blood frozen and muscles tensed at the yawning maw of its hellish gate, under a starless sky. The night deepens and the wind howls behind. Eyeless, inky windows watch as these unhappy few venture onward, into the gate and down, down, down beyond all fated warnings of tongue and stone. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Now, let's stop and think. A little of what I have just done is world building. Some of it was storytelling, certainly, with a minor amount of characterization, but real world building, actual world building, is more the who, what, where, when, why that forms the structure within which stories occur, with a little of the how left for the experience of actually reading or listening to the story itself. Even a lore summary is a kind of storytelling, but it's mostly based around giving you a sense of that structure, the general contours. In a sense, that kind of storytelling is a story about a story, almost. Not in a documentary sense, but as a background. If I open a story with, "Once upon a time in the land of Dragon Song," you might have questions about that land beyond just its name. World-building's role in writing is actually mostly crack-filling. Whatever things happen in said land of Dragon Song as the events of the story unfold will inevitably contain some nods to that setting and certain ideas in it, or things in it, and from this you will get a sense of that world. That sense, as well as how you get it, is world building in practice. So, why are so many people obsessed with world building? Well, when you're a writer, especially of fantasy, science fiction, or anything in between, in short, when you are a writer of the fantastical, you often begin with a fantastical idea. Your quest to fill in the gaps created by the idea in your imagination with a whole tapestry of color leads to innovation and inspiration. It's a thrilling process. It's mostly good as a point of reference for you, the writer. You are going to write that story, aren't you? You are writing it, right? That's not just a weird hypothetical that you came up with and then did nothing with, I assume, because that would mean, as a writer, you're really operating on the level of that one friend that we've all had who asks you weird hypotheticals. Dude, would you rather be a cat, but you're so fat you can barely walk? Or would you rather be a dog, but you're like one of those annoying little dogs that old women carry in their purses? I don't know, man, this feels like a dumb conversation, but I value our friendship, so I guess the cat? Probably I'd be the fat cat. My point is, if you're following me, that for a fantastical writer, world building is a useful exercise, but it's also not the only or even the chief thing of which stories are made. In my example moments ago, I asked you to imagine a group of people. Who are those adventurers? What are their names, their appearances, their personalities? What are they adventuring for? What are their ambitions, their goals, their aspirations? I asked you to place them in a setting. Where is that haunting castle specifically? How far away from the town is it? When is this story taking place? Are these characters trekking through the fall leaves, the summer, the winter snow, or the spring flowers? And who lives in that castle anyway, or else why is it there? Knowing these facts, or discovering or creating if you prefer, can be world building, but drawing your reader in to make them care and walk them through the whole ordeal, that is telling them the story. That is why I say sometimes we experience world building as stories about stories, or why I call it the who, what, where, when, why process. The phrase world building is also, I have to admit, a bit up its own ass. Like a lot of the ways that writers or non-writers talk about writing, it kind of wants to be grandiose or provocative. I wouldn't say sitting down at a computer with yet another cup of homebrewed coffee that I've allowed to turn cold and hammering away at my mechanical keyboard with fingers a little too cold to be comfortable and a little too in my flow now to want to get up and go get a pair of gloves or a sweater ever makes me feel grandiose or provocative. At least not beyond an occasional, oh, that's a good turn of phrase, I'll use that, which I allow myself to briefly entertain before getting back to work. But listening to some cool music while imagining characters that I've written in situations I've devised or have yet to devise does tend to make me feel that way, and so in my opinion, the process of actually writing the story is the process of disappearing any world building on my end, as an imaginative act into a concrete work whose aim is to provoke the same feelings that inspired me to imagine in the first place. Therefore, when we enter a critical posture as we engage with a work written by another, we have to reverse engineer this understanding of the world being built for our benefit. This means that before we ever criticize world building, we should first interest ourselves in its comparatively less romantic but far more instructive sister concept, storytelling. How to tell a story, how to really go about telling that story, and how to understand a story that is being told is a complex topic which has acquired contributions from legendary ancient Greeks like Aristotle to ignominious internet posters of no renown and mixed acumen. When we talk about good writing and bad writing, storytelling should rightfully be a first and highest order concern. Where world-building enters that conversation is in how world-building decisions, which are finalized through storytelling, can then shape the contours of that story in powerful ways. This is the source of our problem. I'd like to make one more detour into the process of discussing the issues around world-building as a concept in gaming and in writing. In Against World Building and Other Provocations, in the essay Against World Building for which the book is named, originally published as an article for GamesIndustry.biz in 2017, Alexis Kennedy lays out the broad territory of the subject in sympathetic terms. Quote, "I just invented a world. It's run by a nation that has 11 emperors. The nation's under attack by a race of four-armed, red-skinned bipeds who have electricity powers. Travel through the empire is exclusively by canal, with narrow boats drawn by steam horses. The culture is vaguely Russian, magic only works when it's raining, food is traditionally eaten raw. That's nothing like anything else out there, but I doubt you'll remember it tomorrow. It doesn't connect to anything, and it doesn't connect to itself. I've chosen a deliberately jarring set of ideas, but the effect is the same when a game is set in not Vienna, because it's got ice magicians, under attack by not the Turks, because they ride zebras. If it's basically the Turks and basically Vienna, riff off them directly, or hell, just set it in Vienna. If it's something else, Work out what the something else is and put it front and center. If your world is no more complicated than these are the enemy, this is why you care, then you don't need to invent centuries of detailed history. If the world is more complicated, then great. You sure as hell need to focus on the reasons why the player should negotiate the complexities. It's easy to write a timeline. It's hard to make a timeline interesting. We're stuck with world building as a term. It's bedded in, and one grumpy column by one mid-ranking games writer isn't going to start a revolution. But next time you hear it, remember that the quality of a story setting is measured not on its expansiveness, but its distinctiveness. Tolkien, as usual, has the best words. Parenthetically, and don't you admire how he finds a way out of all those commas when a sentence really should pile up at the end like a drugged centipede? Quote, "It is the mark of a good fairy story, of the higher or more complete kind, that however wild its events, however fantastic or terrible its adventures, it can give to one child or man that hears it when the turn comes, a catch of the breath, a beat and lifting of the heart, near to, parenthetically, or indeed accompanied by, tears, as keen as that given any form by literary art and having a peculiar quality." End quote. Think for a moment about the worlds you've loved in games. Every one of them will have a moment with that quality. It may be scavengers playing acoustic guitar around a fire, it may be the way backstory clicks into place, it might be the emotional undertone of an invented proverb, it might be the tilt of a ringed planet against the night, but it won't be a timeline. End quote. Well said, Alexis. I in particular love the nod to J.R.R. Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, which for the uninitiated is a lovely essay about fantasy literature, the writing process and all which compels us throughout our experience with such things. These words, I think, ring true even in this context. Kennedy's sentiment does not appear to me to mean do not world build, but instead he seems to be saying, approach storytelling with intentionality. These are theoretically compatible views that nevertheless yield very different mindsets, like the earlier highlighted distinction between the acts of world building and storytelling. What Kennedy is pointing towards is closer to that which compels us, that which animates us, that which inspires us about games. This is why I have referred to world building as vanishing into the writing process, only to be reproduced in terms of its effect or feel in the reader, viewer, or player. This mirrored process is also fundamental to understanding world building in role-playing video games, because the player's choices in creating their character involve them in a very small part of the creation of that world. And so we return to Dragon Age Origins and all its wonderment. Experienced players will recall how the game begins, with an introductory quote leading into an introductory cinematic. These things do inspire, cascade of exposition be damned. Its visuals and narration do much of the work of inspiring the player to feel called by this strange new world. This teaser established the world of Dragon Age to every player who ever started up the game. But next comes character creation, and so much of what makes Origins unique and difficult in hindsight. Players can choose from one of many races and one of many backgrounds. You can be an elf or human mage in the Circle, a dwarven commoner, a dwarven noble, a Dalish forest elf, an elf in the alienage slums, or a human noble. Unlike with Inquisition, these backgrounds aren't purely characterization for role-playing in later scenes. They're actually playable portions of the game and contain some very strong writing. The Mage's Circle, Dwarven Noble, and Elvish Alienage Origins are probably my favorites, but each is a complex narrative dealing in matters of spirituality, class, or race, and sometimes more than one at once. You can see how players who got used to trying all of these options would be let down later in Dragon Age 2 or even Dragon Age Inquisition. It's certainly a strong start for the series, although some origins originally written for the game were cut for time. That's likely why we didn't see this return. It's a lot of divergent writing to try to work back into one story. It's great for creating a character and world building, sure, but to make it relevant, you then need a story that revisits these characters, locations, and ideas in some meaningful way. Origins does this, of course, but imagine having to write every Dragon Age game around that core conceit. Inquisition has a comparably easier structure where the player can visit different locations when they find it convenient and explore them at their leisure, or visit them when the main storyline takes them through the area and skip as much side content as they like. The Origins approach works, but it would be an awkward constraint if the developers needed to write within it every time. Here's your possible beginnings, each point on your quest will revisit these in a way that makes the story specially relevant to you, and so on. It's a great idea for a game, and in fact one can imagine the draw of having not only the player but the companions in their party come from these backgrounds. It would be a little bit easier to replicate if the beginning and middle were the only challenge. The ending is also a problem. Dragon Age Origins lays the foundation for the rest of the series, but the choices made by the player have vast consequences for the world. At least, that's the expectation. In reality, the plot of this game is the world building of the next, especially because each game features a different character and mostly a different cast entirely. The consequences we anticipate are often underwhelming. This was a massive piece of criticism towards Mass Effect 3, another BioWare title, and its ending. Origins doesn't have this problem in such an obvious way, because it's writing a check that will bounce when the next games hit. We can pick the successor to the throne, but it changes very little. We barely even see the future kings or queens, let alone feel their influence on the world. Our character can even die in the end, but it doesn't matter if we play things out such that they survive or whether they die heroically. The hero of Ferelden vanishes into history either way. In Dragon Age Inquisition, the player has to make an important choice. It's not the kind of choice that changes the fate of the world, but rather the fate of two characters. Stroud and Hawke stand with the player and their party in the Fade, and one must make a heroic stand against the demons in order for the others to escape. I have two quibbles with that scene. First, it feels odd that none of the companions can be the ones to make the sacrifice. Obviously the player can't be the one to do it, but it feels weird that no one else can either. Second, and this is the important one, it's extra odd that Stroud is here at all. The way he's introduced as a key figure among the Grey Wardens, I thought we were going to meet my Dragon Age Origins character in this game when I played it on stream, but no, it's Stroud. Who is Stroud? He's a pretty nice guy, a Grey Warden, and an otherwise unremarkable character. I feel like I'm roasting my man for no reason, but I never sacrifice Hawke here. I barely remember meeting Stroud in Dragon Age 2, to the degree he feels like an Easter egg for the sequel when I play through the second game these days. In comparison, Hawke is automatically more empathetic. I know who she is because she's me. Of course I want to live. Imagine if that scene could be a choice between Hawke and the hero of Ferelden. It would have so much more weight. I've heard that Alistair can be in that scene, which is crazy by the way, since there's several ways to kill him or ruin his life already, and so can Loghain, which is equally crazy, and his scene goes insanely hard and makes me like him, almost, but it feels like most people never get there. It's almost always between Stroud and Hawke, which means Stroud is sentenced to death in almost every playthrough. It's a meaningful choice that is made less so by a conceit of design. The hero of Ferelden is made more obsolete in these later games, but it's because of the first game's writing. There are so many potential outcomes, so many player choices to account for, that continuing the world means ignoring what are increasingly its most relevant qualities to the player. It's BioWare's core franchise writing problem all over, but it started here. In other words, Dragon Age Origins has a world-building problem. It's not a problem with its specific world-building, it's a problem with the way the concept affects the writing going forward. Some of the hardest-hitting pieces of writing in Origins are things like being abandoned in the deep roads as the Dwarven Noble, or cutting up disgusting human nobles as an alienage elf. And from beginning to end, it's a compelling story to experience. But there's a reason stories like this don't come along every day. It's not just that it's so good that it's hard to pull off, it relies on a distinct design philosophy that takes extra contorting in the process, and has real repercussions down the line. Maybe that's why our memories of it are so fond, after all. Alright everybody, this has been a fun video about video games and about writing. I love writing about writing, I love talking about writing with you guys, and I love sharing stuff like this. I do plan on making more videos talking about the Dragon Age games, and if it feels like I was a little harsh with Origins, it's just because I've had to play through a bunch of it to get footage for some of these videos, and it's got some parts that you can kind of feel how dated it is. Great game though, to be honest. If you're looking for RPGs to play, I totally recommend this series, because wow, right? I mean, some of the moments will really hit you, and to be honest, it's kind of like Mass Effect, where you really want to play through the early ones so that you have context for the later ones. So starting with Origins, then going to Dragon Age 2, going to Dragon Age Inquisition after that, and then eventually I hear we're getting Dragon Age Dreadwolf, to Tevinter, Solus, lots of fun stuff on the horizon for this series. I do want to talk a ton more about really personal ideas and feelings that I have about the writing of these games, because I think out of every RPG series, Dragon Age probably affords some of the most interesting writing conversations, so we will be returning to this topic in the future. This video was originally produced for my patrons at patreon.com, so thank them if you're watching it much, much later. And if you are one of them, and you're watching this when it first comes out, I guess I hope you're pleased that you didn't have to wait months and months for it. Because who knows? I mean, I can hold on to some Patreon exclusive videos forever. Some of them I end up releasing down the line. But mostly I try to keep things under wraps for a few months. So, yeah, I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this. I'm just kind of rambling here at the end, just to kind of fill it out a little bit, and hopefully make sure that you guys aren't too mad at me for being a little bit rude about this really good video game that everybody likes, that everybody says is the best. It's the best one. It's the best. Dragon Age Inquisition. The beginning is kind of slow. Dragon Age 2. I mean, oh my god, it's so repetitive. Like the loops are really repetitive, and all this other stuff. But look at all the choices you can make, and you can do all these different things. And the start of Dragon Age Origins really hooks you in. Yeah, it's all very true. And I totally get that. It's a great game. I just wanted to do a video about some of the challenges of writing such a great game like this and such a great game series. So until next time, give the video a like, a comment, tell me what you think. I am super fascinated. If you've played Origins, also definitely tell me what your favorite character origin is. Tell me who your favorite companions are, because maybe that'll come up in a future video. Maybe I want to know. Until next time, everybody, take care.